Nobody warns you that grief is mostly ordinary. It's not the funeral, it's not the flowers, it's not the sympathy cards. It's the random Tuesday morning 6 months later when something makes you laugh, and your first instinct is to text the person you love. Then reality catches up. They're gone. And for a moment, the world feels impossibly heavy all over again. That's where this story begins. Lucía had spent 6 months surviving rather than living. The days passed. The seasons changed. Friends moved forward, but she remained frozen in the space her husband left behind. Then, without warning, chaos arrived at her front door. Because her husband, being exactly who he was, had left her one final gift. Not a letter, not a grand gesture. A dog. A massive shelter dog with terrible manners, endless energy, and absolutely no respect for personal space. And somehow, that impossible dog changed everything. Lucía was 32, an illustrator living in Seville, a city that seemed made of sunlight and music. She illustrated children's books for a living, always had ink on her fingers, and never went anywhere without a sketchbook tucked under her arm. She was the kind of person who made life feel lighter, curious, warm, the kind who said yes before fear had a chance to answer. Then there was Mateo. They met at a friend's birthday party and spent 3 hours talking in the kitchen while everyone else celebrated in the next room. She told him his jokes were terrible. He admitted they were. By the end of the night, neither wanted to leave. 3 years later, they married in a flower-filled courtyard outside the city. 6 years after that, they had built a life together, not a flashy one, but a beautiful one. Lazy Sunday mornings, coffee on the balcony, inside jokes nobody else understood, the kind of love that quietly becomes home. Then, on an ordinary afternoon in November, Mateo was killed in a car accident. No warning, no goodbye. One moment, he was part of her future. The next, he was part of her memories. And suddenly, the life they had built together felt less like a home and more like a museum, filled with reminders of someone who wasn't coming back. 6 months later, Lucía's apartment felt less like a home and more like a memorial. Mateo's coffee mug still sat beside the espresso machine. His jacket still hung by the door. His toothbrush was still in the bathroom. Not because she was clinging to them, because moving them felt impossible. Every morning brought the same cruel ritual, one brief, half-awake second where she forgot he was gone. Then reality returned. Her friends had stopped calling as often. Her mother left meals outside the door. Work emails piled up unanswered. Sketchbooks gathered dust. The world kept moving. Lucía didn't. Then, on a rainy Thursday afternoon, someone started pounding on her door. Not knocking, pounding. "Lucía, open up before I break this thing down." She froze. Gabriel. Mateo's younger brother. Of all the people she wasn't ready to see, Gabriel was near the top of the list. She stayed silent. Then came a loud crash, followed by furious barking. And Gabriel shouting, "RUFUS, drop the mailbox." A second later, her door burst open, and so did the dog. 90 pounds of mud, fur, and absolute chaos exploded into the apartment. He jumped on the couch, knocked over a lamp, sprinted into the kitchen, and immediately began stealing food. Gabriel appeared in the doorway, drenched from the rain and looking exhausted. "Good," he said, "you're alive." Lucía stared at him. "What are you doing here?" Gabriel hesitated before pulling an envelope from his jacket. The moment she saw the handwriting, her heart stopped. Mateo. Inside was shelter paperwork for the dog. At the bottom was Mateo's signature, dated 2 weeks before the accident. There was also a letter. "My love, if you're reading this, something happened to me. And knowing you, you're hiding from the world. So I'm giving you Rufus. Trust me, you cannot disappear with a 90-pound dog in your house. He'll drag you outside, steal your food, destroy your schedule, and force you to keep living. I know this won't fix anything, but I need you to keep going. Because the world is better with you in it. I love you. Always. Mateo. Lucía read it twice. Then she broke. Not the quiet tears she'd cried for months. The real kind. The kind that leaves you shaking. Gabriel didn't interrupt. He just sat with her. After a while, she looked up. Rufus had somehow gotten his head stuck inside an empty cereal box and was wandering around the kitchen like a confused cardboard monster. For the first time in 6 months, Lucía laughed. A real laugh. A laugh that sounded strange in her own ears. Gabriel smiled but said nothing. He simply let the moment exist. A week later, the shelter called with a problem. The adoption had never been finalized. Rufus originally came from a shelter in Santiago de Compostela, and unless Lucía picked him up within 10 days, he would have to be returned. The trip was over 800 kilometers. Lucía refused immediately. I'm not going. Then I'll drive, Gabriel said. No. The next morning, he was still sleeping on her couch. 3 days later, Rufus had destroyed a shoe, 2 pillows, and somehow learned how to open a cabinet. On day 4, Lucía walked into the kitchen and found him eating leftover pasta straight from the refrigerator. She stared at him, then sighed. Fine. Gabriel appeared instantly, as if he'd been waiting. Road trip. Lucía pointed at him. I hate you. He grinned. Good, that's almost an emotion. They left on a Friday morning. Gabriel's car was a 10-year-old. That made a sound he described as character every time you hit a speed bump. There was a crack running halfway across the dashboard, a passenger side window that only opened halfway, and a pine tree air freshener hanging from the mirror that had definitely been there for longer than it had any right to be. Rufus took up the entire backseat and part of the front. By the time they hit the first service station outside Seville, Lucía had already established that Rufus could not be trusted at a petrol station, which she discovered when he stole 2 sandwiches from an unattended display rack. A decision he made with such confidence and such absolute lack of guilt that the attendant seemed too surprised to even say anything. Gabriel paid for the sandwiches. He also bought 4 more, because Rufus had already eaten both of the ones they'd packed for the road. Day 1, they made it to Extremadura. Stopped for the night at a small roadside hotel that took approximately 45 minutes to negotiate into, because most places don't advertise a 90-pound dog policy, and Gabriel's technique for this was to just walk in confidently with Rufus and see how long it took for someone to say something. Day 2, somewhere on the road between Salamanca and Zamora, Rufus spotted sheep. There was a roadside cafe with a small terrace. They'd stopped for coffee. They had Rufus on a leash. The leash, it turned out, had a clip that was rated for a much smaller animal. Rufus made a decision in about a quarter of a second. The clip snapped. He was across the road before either of them could react. And for the next 20 minutes, Gabriel chased a 90-pound dog through a sheep field in Salamanca while Lucía stood by the car, and the cafe owner stood on the terrace, and everyone in the immediate area watched Gabriel trip over a small hill and lose a shoe and eventually corner Rufus against a stone wall, where the dog sat down like he'd accomplished something important and let himself be released with complete dignity. Gabriel walked back to the car, covered in grass stains, one shoe, Rufus trotting beside him like a gentleman. Lucía was already in the passenger seat. She did not look at him. Not a word, he said. I wasn't going to say a word, she said. Pause. You were thinking very loud, though. Day 3, the hotel bathroom incident. Rufus locked himself in somehow, from the inside, at midnight. This is apparently something a determined dog with enough body weight can do to a cheap bathroom door. He did not seem distressed about it. He seemed perfectly comfortable in there, based on the sounds. The problem was that Gabriel had to call the front desk at midnight to ask for help getting his dog out of a bathroom he'd locked from the inside. And the front desk person's expression, when he explained the situation, was one of those expressions that just stays with you. Day 4. They were in Castilla y Leon, on a stretch of road that runs through country so flat and wide and empty that the sky seems too big for it. There were no houses visible, no other cars, just golden fields as far as you could see. The kind of place where your brain goes quiet because there's nothing to look at, and you end up looking inward instead. The fuel gauge had been drifting toward empty for a while. Gabriel had been watching it. He had said nothing, because the last 2 gas stations had been closed, and the GPS had been rerouting them around roadworks, since Zamora and he had been operating on the theory that there would definitely be a station soon. There was not a station soon. The car rolled to a stop in the most complete silence either of them had experienced in days. Just the tick of the cooling engine. Wind moving through the grass on both sides of the road. Rufus's breathing from the back seat. Gabriel looked at the gauge. Looked at the road. "So," he said. Lucía looked at him. "We're out of fuel," he said. She looked at the empty road ahead. She looked at the empty road behind. She looked at the sky. And then something snapped in her, but not the bad kind. Something that had been pulled tight for too long suddenly just released, and she started laughing. Not the polite kind. Not the small, uncomfortable kind you do when something is mildly funny. The kind where your whole body gets involved, where you can't quite catch your breath, where it kind of sounds like crying even though it isn't. Gabriel stared at her. And then he started too, because it was genuinely absurd. All of it. The dog eating the sandwiches and the sheep field and the locked bathroom and the single shoe and now this. Stuck in the middle of absolutely nowhere in Castilla, with no signal and a 90-pound dog and a car that had chosen this exact moment to finally run out of patience. They sat on the side of the road and laughed, until neither of them had any laugh left. And then it went quiet, the kind of quiet where something real is allowed to come forward. Gabriel was looking at the horizon. His jaw was set. His hands were loose in his lap. And when he finally spoke, his voice had lost all the performance, all the jokes, all the deflection, all the movement. "I never said goodbye to him." Lucía looked over. He kept his eyes on the road. "He called me 3 days before the accident." He stopped, swallowed. "I didn't answer." She didn't say anything, just listened. "He left a voicemail. I still have it." His voice had gotten careful in the way voices get when something is very close to breaking. "I've listened to it a lot, too many times probably." "What does he say?" Gabriel shook his head slightly, not as in he wouldn't tell her, more like the words were difficult to move around. "He just wanted to talk. He said he was sorry about the argument. He said he missed me. He asked if I wanted to come for dinner sometime." He let out a breath. Normal stuff. The kind of stuff you say when you think there's still time. Silence. "I was going to call him back," Gabriel said. "I kept meaning to. I was still angry, but I was getting over it. I just kept not doing it, because there was always tomorrow." He covered his eyes with one hand, just for a moment, then dropped it. "I don't even remember what we were fighting about." His voice was different now, hollow. 3 years, Lucía. We didn't speak for 3 years over something I cannot remember." That last sentence landed like something heavy hitting the ground. Lucía sat with it, not trying to fix it, just sitting with it. Then she said quietly, "He talked about you." Gabriel looked at her. "He missed you. He was stubborn, you know how he was. He would never have admitted it out loud, but I knew. He asked about you sometimes." She turned and looked at him fully. He was waiting too. He just thought there was more time. Gabriel's face did something complicated. He looked away, and for a while neither of them spoke, just the wind in the grass, Rufus doing something in the back seat that sounded inadvisable. It was the first time, in 6 months, that Lucía had talked about Mateo not as a wound, but as a person. And it was the first time Gabriel had let anyone see the thing he'd been carrying since November, not the grief itself, but the guilt sitting underneath it. 2 broken things, sitting by the side of a road in the middle of nowhere. A farmer eventually came by. Actual fuel can in the back of his truck, as if the universe had been waiting for them to have that conversation before it sent any help. He looked at the car, looked at Gabriel, looked at Rufus hanging his enormous head out the window, and didn't ask a single question. Just sold them enough fuel to reach the next town, charged a very fair price, drove away. They got back on the road. But something had shifted, not dramatically, nothing big and cinematic, just quieter, like pressure that had been building had somewhere to go now. That night they stopped in Leon. And because neither of them felt like being inside, they sat on a bench in a small square near the old quarter of the city, the cathedral lit up in the distance, Rufus asleep with his head across both their feet like he'd decided they were his property. And Lucía started talking. Not about her grief as a concept, about Mateo specifically, the small, specific, completely irreplaceable things. "Do you know what I miss most?" she said. Gabriel shook his head. "The way he sang when he was cooking." She smiled at the square. He was terrible, like genuinely, ear-damagingly bad, and he knew he was terrible and he did it anyway every single time. Full commitment. Wrong notes, wrong lyrics sometimes, just completely unbothered. Gabriel made a sound that was almost a laugh. "Yeah." And the way he always forgot where he parked. "Oh, that was not forgetting," Gabriel said. She looked at him. He just didn't pay attention when he parked. He'd be already thinking about something else by the time he turned the engine off. He'd been doing it since he was 17. Our parents used to lose their minds. He told me he had a terrible memory for parking. He had a perfect memory. He just didn't care enough to use it for parking. She laughed, and this time it wasn't the release valve kind, the shocked reflex laugh. It was just a laugh, the kind you have when something is funny. They stayed in that square for hours, trading stories. Gabriel telling her things about Mateo she hadn't known, the teenage version, the younger brother version, the person he was before she met him. Her telling Gabriel things about the person Mateo had become, the husband, the man who remembered the anniversary of the first time they'd had coffee together, the one who could not be trusted near a hardware store because he'd come out with 17 things he hadn't gone in for. At some point, Lucía realized that talking about Mateo didn't feel like pressing on a wound anymore. It felt like something else, like keeping him there, like the more specifically she described him, the more real he stayed. And the more real he stayed, the more she could hold him somewhere that wasn't just loss. She didn't say any of this to Gabriel, but she thought it, and she noticed it. Santiago de Compostela arrived on day 6. Rufus found the whole city deeply interesting. He had opinions about every corner. The shelter was a 20-minute drive out of the city center. Small, well-run, the kind of place staffed by people who clearly loved animals more than they cared about anything else. The director, a woman named Dolers, 50s, practical, the kind of person who got things done while everyone else was still deciding, met them at the gate. She shook Lucia's hand, held it for a moment. "Your husband was a good man," she said, just directly, no preamble. Lucía nodded, couldn't say anything. "He called us several times before the adoption was finalized. He was very thorough. He asked a lot of questions." She smiled slightly. "He asked if Rufus was genuinely as bad as the note said or if it was exaggerated." She looked at the dog. "I was honest with him. He said perfect." She finished the paperwork. Officially, as of that afternoon, Rufus belonged to Lucía. And then Dolers said there was one more thing. She went inside and came back with another envelope. Small, the same note paper as the first one. Lucía stared at it. "He left this when he finalized the paperwork over the phone," Dolers said. "He emailed it and asked us to print it and keep it for you, said you'd come eventually." Gabriel put his hand briefly on Lucía's shoulder, then stepped back to give her space. She opened it. "Lucía, if you're reading this, you came. You got in the car and you drove and you came all the way to get him. I knew you would. I have something important to tell you and I need you to really hear it. You are allowed to be happy. Not someday. Now, whenever it arrives, whatever shape it takes, you don't have to earn it. You don't have to feel guilty about it. You're allowed. I want so many things for you. I want you to keep drawing. I want you to make dinner for people you love. I want you to have mornings that are slow and good and feel like something. Life isn't something you survive, Lucía. It's something you participate in. Get back in, please. I love you. I'll always love you. But love isn't a reason to stop. Mateo. She didn't make a sound. Just stood there with the paper in her hands, in the car park of a dog shelter outside Santiago de Compostela, the wind coming in off the Galician hills, Rufus sitting beside her doing nothing stupid for once. Gabriel was a few feet away, looking at the mountains. She read the letter again. And then a third time. And then she folded it and put it inside her jacket, against her chest, and took a long, slow breath, and looked up at the sky. Somewhere in the shelter, someone must have opened a lunchbox, because Rufus's entire attention snapped away from her immediately, and he started toward the fence with great purpose. She grabbed his leash. "Come on," she said, "you absolute nightmare." The drive south felt completely different from the drive north. Which doesn't make sense on paper. Same road, same car, same creaky noise on the speed bumps, same passenger window that only opened halfway. But things that have changed inside you make everything outside you look different. Same landscape, different light. Somewhere around Valladolid, Lucía opened her bag and found the sketchbook she'd thrown in almost as an afterthought on the morning they left. She hadn't packed it deliberately. She'd just seen it on the desk and put it in her bag and not thought about it again. She opened it. The last drawing was from 10 months ago. A corner of their kitchen, the morning sun coming through the window in a particular way she'd wanted to capture. She remembered drawing it. Mateo had been in the background making coffee, had wandered into the frame of what she was sketching, and she'd put him in without thinking about it. He's small in the drawing, not the focus, just part of the room, just there. She looked at it for a long time. Then she turned to a clean page. She drew Rufus asleep across the backseat, one paw hanging off the edge, completely boneless in the way dogs manage to be when they sleep. Then she drew the sheep field from day 2, with a small figure running through it with one shoe. Then the cereal box on the kitchen floor back in Seville, the morning this all started. She drew for an hour. Gabriel noticed, but didn't say anything. They stopped for dinner at a place outside Salamanca, a proper sit-down dinner, not a drive-through, the first real meal they'd had since Leon. And they talked, but differently than before. Less like two people circling something heavy, more like two people who had already been through it and were on the other side, sitting in the slightly dazed, slightly lighter feeling that comes after. "What are you going to do?" Gabriel asked. "When you get back?" She thought about it. "Answer some emails, probably. My agent is going to need a lot of apologizing, too." She paused. "Call my mother. She'll be relieved. She's going to cry. Definitely. And then cry about being relieved that she cried." Gabriel laughed. "Your mother has a whole system." Lucía smiled. "She really does." They arrived back in Seville on a Sunday evening, and the city was doing that thing it does in early summer, where the light goes sideways through the streets and everything turns a kind of impossible gold, and the air smells like jasmine and warm stone, and the sound of fountain water carries from 3 streets away. Lucía stood outside her building with Rufus on his lead and looked up at the windows of her apartment. The same windows she'd been looking out of for 6 months. Same apartment. Same life, technically speaking, and yet. She went upstairs. She moved the coffee mug. Not in a dramatic, I am healing way. Not as a statement. She just picked it up, washed it, put it in the cabinet. Because it was a mug and it should be in the cabinet. Because leaving it there wasn't keeping Mateo anywhere. He was already somewhere she could actually reach him, in the letter in her jacket, in the stories from Leon, in the drawing of the morning sun in the kitchen, in the laugh she finally had over a cereal box. She called her mother. Her mother cried, then cried about being relieved, exactly as predicted. She opened her email, wrote a long apology to her agent, started looking through the project she'd committed to months ago, the one that had been sitting with a dead battery tablet and an unopened brief. She stayed up until midnight looking at it, made notes in the margins of a printed-out brief, ran out of pen, found another one, kept going. Gabriel had driven back to his own apartment. He lived across town, had his own life, his own things to get back to. But he texted her when he got home. Just, hope Rufus only ate one thing tonight. She looked at the message. Rufus was at her feet, chewing something he'd found somewhere that she'd chosen not to investigate. She wrote back, define one thing. He sent back a laugh emoji. Then, how are you actually? She sat with that for a moment. Better, she wrote, I think. Good, he wrote, that's the hard answer. She set the phone down, looked around the apartment. Not a museum anymore, just hers, theirs in a different way now. Mateo's presence had shifted from something stuck in place to something that moved with her. She wasn't sure she could explain it, she just felt it. The next several months moved differently than the months before. Not easily. Nobody snaps back. That's not how it works. There were still bad mornings when she'd reach for the phone before she remembered. Mornings when a specific song came on and she had to sit down because of it. Mornings when she'd watch the sun come through the kitchen window exactly the way she'd drawn it, and it would hurt in a specific, particular way that didn't have a word. But there were also other mornings. Mornings when she made coffee and sat by that same window and just was there. Present. Not surviving the morning, just having it. Rufus taking up most of the floor space, her sketchbook open, nothing pressing. She finished the project for her agent. Sent it in 3 weeks late with a heartfelt note. Got back a response that said they'd been worried about her and were glad she was back, and also the work was beautiful. She started answering her phone again. The friends who'd been patient with months of silence, and there were several which she kept being surprised by, were just glad to hear from her. Nobody made her explain. Nobody required her to account for herself. They just picked up where things had been or close to it. Her mother started calling instead of leaving Tupperware. Progress. Gabriel texted fairly regularly. Not every day, not in a pointed way, just they were in contact. He'd send her something funny that happened at work. She'd send him a photo of something Rufus had destroyed. He sent back escalating degrees of horror at the destruction. She found, over weeks, that she looked forward to the texts. That was new information. He came for dinner one Sunday. She cooked, which was notable in itself. She hadn't cooked for anyone in almost a year. Nothing ambitious, just the kind of meal you make when you want someone to feel at home. He brought wine and a dog toy for Rufus that Rufus destroyed in 8 minutes, which was apparently some kind of record. After dinner, they sat on the small balcony with the wine and the evening. Rufus sprawled between their chairs. Neither of them made anything of it. It was just dinner, just a Sunday evening. But she noticed, somewhere in the middle of clearing the table, that she'd stopped moving around the apartment like it was someone else's. It felt like hers again. The living felt normal, not different from before, just normal, hers. It didn't happen fast. That's the thing about this story, nothing in it happened fast. The grief didn't resolve in a week. The road trip took 6 days. The months after were genuinely months, not a montage. Love was the same. It crept in the way all the important things had, through small doors, through Sunday dinners that became a regular thing, through a phone call at 11 at night that was supposed to be 5 minutes and was an hour and a half. Through the day Rufus got sick, nothing serious, but they didn't know that yet, and Gabriel came over immediately, with no asking required, just was there. Through the way she'd started to know, by the particular quality of his silence, what kind of day he was having. She was scared of it. Let's be honest about that. Not because she didn't feel it. Because she did feel it, and that was the terrifying part. Because feeling it meant letting something in. And the last time she'd let something in with her whole heart, she'd lost it. And she knew now exactly how that felt. She told him this. One evening, not dramatically, they were just on the balcony again. It had become their place, and she just said it. I'm scared. I want you to know that. I don't know what this is between us, but I know I'm scared of it. He looked at her for a moment. Yeah, he said, me too. Which wasn't a declaration, wasn't a movie speech, but it was honest. And honest was the only language either of them had been using since the empty road in Castilla. I'm scared, she said, that it means forgetting him. Gabriel shook his head, and he said something she didn't expect. Lucia, I knew him for 33 years. Loving you doesn't make me forget my brother. It's not how it works. She sat with that. He didn't give you that dog, Gabriel said, so you'd be alone forever, you know that. She did know that. The letter had said it plainly. She'd read it enough times by now. She was allowed to be happy. She didn't have to earn it. He sent you the most destructive animal currently living in Seville, Gabriel said. And he sent him through me, specifically, which means he either had no faith in my dog-handling abilities, which is fair, or he was trying to tell you something. She looked at him. I think, he said carefully, that he knew what he was doing. The quiet that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was the particular quiet of two people who have decided something, even if they haven't said it in so many words yet. When Gabriel reached over and took her hand, Rufus lifted his head, assessed the situation, and went back to sleep, unbothered, as if to say, finally. It was a Sunday in late October when they drove down to Cadiz, about an hour and a half south of Seville on the coast, because the weather was still holding, and Rufus was losing his mind from not having enough space to run, and the beach was the only place big enough to contain him. They let him off the lead on the sand. He went absolutely sideways, chasing waves, chasing seagulls, getting the seagulls, then seeming surprised and confused by that outcome and letting them go. Running back to them, soaking wet, demanding they acknowledge how great he was, then running back into the ocean again. Lucía and Gabriel walked at the water's edge. The late October light on the Atlantic is a particular thing, lower in the sky, more golden, the kind of light that makes everything look more deliberate. She was thinking about the beach at Cadiz. Mateo had loved it here. They'd come down several times over the years. She'd expected the memory of that to be harder today, but it wasn't hard exactly. It was present. He was present, not painfully. More the way someone is present when you love them, there without needing to be explained. Can I tell you something? She said. Yeah. I feel like I carry him with me now. She looked at the water. Not the way I was before, where it was, wait. More like the way you carry someone you love who's far away. They're not gone, they're just somewhere else. Gabriel nodded slowly. I thought that would take longer, she said. Or that it was something you had to work to get to, but it just happened. Somewhere between Salamanca and here. He looked at her. Somewhere between Salamanca and the cereal box, I think. She laughed. Rufus came back at that exact moment, soaking wet, and attempted to climb into both of their laps simultaneously, which was logistically impossible, and which he attempted anyway. They both ended up wet and sandy, and completely unable to stay serious about anything. And somewhere in the chaos of it, in the laughing and the wet dog smell and the Atlantic light, something settled into place. Not dramatically, not with music, just the way right things settle. Quietly, finally. Years pass the way years pass, when life has actually been joined back up to itself, in a blur of days that are good and ordinary, with the hard ones folded in between. They got married in Seville. Small ceremony, because they were both done with anything that required too much performance. Her family, his family, a few close friends, the same courtyard where Mateo and Lucía had once danced until 2 a.m. There was probably something significant in that. Nobody said anything about it, but everyone felt it, the way you feel things at weddings that are complicated and true. Her mother cried, then cried about how she was crying. The system remained intact. Lucia's work came back fully, not just back, but better. Something had changed in the way she drew, more specific, more willing to put the difficult things on paper. Her editor said the new work had a depth it hadn't had before. Lucía understood what that meant and couldn't quite explain it to anyone else. Gabriel was still Gabriel, still incapable of sitting still, still sarcastic in exactly the way that made her laugh even when she didn't want to. Still, somehow, the worst person she'd ever met at remembering to buy the right kind of coffee despite living with someone who was very clear about the right kind of coffee. And Rufus. Older, slower, gray around his muzzle now, moving more deliberately, requiring longer to get up from wherever he'd been sleeping. The chaos had reduced from a force of nature to something more like managed mischief. He had figured out a reliable way to open the refrigerator and had apparently decided this was enough power and didn't need to expand further. Visitors to the house always heard the story eventually, usually Gabriel's version, which featured significantly more drama and at least one detail that wasn't true. Sometimes Lucia's version, which was quieter and ended in different places. But always, at some point during the telling, Rufus would make a move. A sandwich off a table, someone's bag, a child's biscuit, executed with extreme smoothness and zero shame. And every time, without fail, everyone in the room would laugh, including Lucia, including Gabriel, including, in the way that those who love us most find ways to stay present, Mateo. The road, and the ridiculous dog, and someone willing to sit with you on the side of the road in the middle of nowhere until something shifts.